Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. This is a story about what if Naruto becomes strongest mage of fairy tale. Before I start, please support for more amazing content and do consider subscribing to my channel and share this video with your friends. And check out the description as well. Let's start the video. When Naruto Uzumaki used the summoning jutsu with the Kyuubi's chakra, he had expected to summon a giant toad to help him out of the hole. His stupid pervert of a sensei Jiraiya had thrown him down. You see, Naruto Uzumaki was a 12-year-old boy that hails from the ninja village known as the village hidden in the leaves. He had bright blonde hair and deep blue eyes that went well with his well-tanned skin. Adorning each cheek on his face were 3 whisker-like birthmarks. But he didn't expect to find that he was still falling from the sky, and now he looked down to see that he was falling above a forest. A forest he didn't even recognize, so thinking quickly Naruto reached in the pouch on the back of his pants and pulled out a dagger with a paper note attacked to it. Throwing it under him, he clapped his hands together and closed his eyes while channeling his inner energy. Boom. The rush of wind from the exploding weapon slowed Naruto down, but that also had some unseen consequences for him as he fell right through the flames of the explosion and set his own clothes ablaze. Acting as fast as she could, he shed his pants and jacket so that he was only wearing his green boxers and fishnet shirt. Okay, now he was mostly naked and falling down to the ground. Going through the hand signs, Naruto tried to summoning jutsu again, only for absolutely nothing to happen. What the hell is going on? Naruto shouted in a moment of panic before he grinned when he came up with an idea. Using almost every single drop of energy he had in his system, he collected it all and waited for the ground to get closer before he crossed the index and middle finger of each hand together in a plus sign. Shadow clone jutsu. Naruto shouted before he grabbed his chest in pain as easily 1,000 copies of him appeared under him. He let go of his chest and saw that he was about to hit the ground, and he used his clones by forming them under him to form a pile for him to land on. As he landed on the clones, they popped and vanished in puffs of smoke. Naruto hit the ground with a thud, and he was about to stand up for a moment before the pain in his chest came back. The same pain spread throughout his entire body as his chakra that he had left seemed to be crushing his own chakra coils. The chakra from the clones came rushing back to him, and with it a new tio of energy entered Naruto's body. The combination of all these energies started to destroy his own body from the inside out. Chakra forced itself out of the coils before infusing with his muscles. In the pit of his stomach it could feel the newer energy collecting and turning into something new. Wendy. Don't wander off on your own. Naruto would have called out to the annoying voice, but the chakra had started to leak into his voice, rendering him mute at the moment as his vocal cords started to swell slightly. Breathing itself was a problem, and every fiber of his being was screaming in agony. The blue aura glowed around his body, and it must have alerted the person nearby to his presence, since a blue-haired girl with brown eyes about his age came from the bushes, and her eyes widened when she saw him. A white cat came next to her, with wings coming from the cat's back. He saw his own energy slowly going towards them, and with great effort Naruto raised his aching arm and made the stop motion. Run, all way. Naruto managed to shout before he was forced to arc his back in pain. The girl that seemed like she was Wendy finally noticed what was going on, and she narrowly dodged as the blue energy rushed at her. The cat wasn't as lucky as the blue energy attacked to her, and she was dragged towards Naruto quickly. Once the cat got close enough, the one named Wendy saw as the cat was absorbed into Naruto's body through his chest. Carla. Wendy shouted as the blue energy started to fade away from Naruto's body, and she could see how much pain he was in. She saw the boy convulse on the ground in continued pain, and she immediately knew that he hadn't meant to do anything to her cat on purpose. He was in pain before they had gotten here, and he had warned them to run away. That was why she rushed to his side and her hands glowed green, and she placed them on his chest. The purple circle appeared over the boy's body, and she watched in morbid fascination as blah CK markings appeared on his stomach before the swirl on his navel started to completely go back. Red energy flew out of the black spot before going through the portal above them. It hurts. Naruto shouted in pain as the red energy of the Kyuubi left his body and if he had to guess went back to where they came from. Even he could tell right now through the pain that they weren't in Konoha anymore. He felt his heart beating like crazy and all at once 9 tails of energy flew out of his body, but attacked to the 9th tail was blue energy going as well. He pulled at the energy and forced as much of it back into his body as possible before the portal closed and what was left of the blue and some red energy went back into his body. Hold on. The girl told him as his heart started to slow down to a normal beat as she healed him, and the black marking on his stomach started to vanish until all that was left was his tanned skin. Naruto felt as if fire had been dumped into his veins, and the pain in his throat was starting to go away. Brya. Naruto shouted and the leaves on the trees above them were blasted off their branches by his voice. Wendy flinched back as she was assaulted as a strange killing intent behind the roar. The roar itself caused no real damage, but she felt her natural instinct to run away from a predator act up. She kept healing him anyway, or at least tried to reduce his pain. He could feel something destroying and rebuilding his muscles before destroying them and rebuilding them stronger again. On the outside of his body it wouldn't look like he was getting stronger, but the density of his muscle fibers were increasing at a startling pace. As his body strength increased, she felt a secondary energy to her own magic started to pout out of his pores. She could sense a magic container inside him start to grow, and it gave off a signature similar to Carla's. Did his body absorb her cat so that he would be able to form or repair his magic container? The strange energy in his body started to fade away completely, and with it gone he finally passed out. The fact he had stayed awake through the Woil thing showed he had an amazing pain tolerance. I better get him to Master Raubal. Wendy thought as she placed her arms under him before she had to apply an actual effort to lift the boy about the same age as her. The fact his muscles were denser also meant that his body would be a lot heavier. Whatever that strange energy had been had affected his body greatly. She saw some feathers sticking out his back, and when she turned her head to look closer, she saw that they were white feathered wings like Carla had been able to use. As she walked she silently mourned the loss of her friend as tears fell down her cheeks, even though she knew that her cat would still be alive in some form through this guy on her back. She silently hoped that he would become her friend because while a small part of her knew that this guy was the initial reason she lost Carla, the majority of her knew that he didn't do it on purpose and tried to warn them. He did warn them, but Carla just hadn't been fast enough to avoid the weird energy. Wendy had to walk for about 20 minutes before she entered the village her guild was located in. Cait's shelter. The village was very small, being only having a few small huts for people to live in. At the end of the village was a building shaped like a white cat's head with tribal decorations on it. People greeted her as she walked by, seemingly fine with the fact she was carrying a half-naked person on her back. Most of the people in the town were in their late 30s to early 40s, with a few being past that and only 2 or 3 being under 30. They were all dressed in tribal clothing and many wore face paint. Entering the guild, she immediately saw her guild master Raubal sitting at the bar drinking whiskey. She ran up to him and he looked at her with a raised eyebrow. "Wendy? Who do you have with you?" Raubal asked and his bushy eyebrows raised a little in surprise. If Naruto was awake he would no doubt make a comment about how this man's eyebrows connected to his beard. It was like the guy had eyebrow all over his face, which was pretty funny. "I don't know, when I was in the forest I heard noises and saw him glowing, and then I helped heal him. He was in a lot of pain," Wendy said while leaving out the part about Naruto absorbing Carla. She wasn't sure how Raubal would act if he heard that and she didn't want to find out. She would have to tell him eventually and it looks like he already figured it out. Did this boy hurt Carla? Raubal asked with a very slight edge to his tone and Wendy shook her head. "Not on purpose. He told us to run away from him and some strange energy grabbed Carla and pulled her into him," Wendy said as she looked down at the ground and she moved Naruto from her back and onto the table. Raubal moved over to Naruto and placed an elderly hand on his chest. Yes, Carla is still alive in some form. It would appear this boy had created a sort of fusion with her and being bigger and stronger his body was the dominant one," Raubal said and Wendy sighed in relief. Being fused was better than being dead by a long shot, but she was still sad at this whole thing. Of course, this was the first time in a long time she had seen somebody her age this was the first time she had seen a person that was actually her age. "How long do you think he will be asleep?" Wendy asked with a nervous tilt of her head and she placed her hands behind her back and shuffled her feet a bit. "Couples weeks I think," Raubal said out loud and Wendy sighed lightly. She would have to wait a while before she learned his name. The wait was going to kill her. Chapter end. Naruto will have extremely large magic reserves, but no, he will not have Kurama or chakra. Right now the only magic he will know how to do by instinct is the magic that exceeds used to fly around. Naruto will have enhanced strength and speed being his primary weapons in battle, with his great endurance and stamina being pluses. He has no real long range or any at all right now. His fighting style and abilities were inspired by Morgiana from Magi. He has her natural abilities and the ability to fly. Add in how Naruto is great at on the fly battle, plus the fact he can learn different magic eventually and he will become more powerful. Right now though he is only a close combat fighter. It had been 2 weeks since Naruto had his surprise landing in the forest outside Cait's shelter, and faster than Raubal had expected Naruto was finally showing signs of waking up. The new magic core in his body had completely settled down and became a natural part of his body to replace his lost chakra. Guild members stood around him while he was waking up and Wendy was right next to the bed. "The shorty seems to be waking up sooner than you thought, eh Master Raubal?" A tall and lanky person with a pineapple ponytail asked. Like most of the men around the guild, he seemed to wear no shirt. As strange as it seemed, he just had on baggy pants and a sleeveless open vest on. He had Fang-styled face paint under his eyes and 2 marks over his eyes as well. He was also now sporting a black eye as he was launched in the air by an unexpected punch to the face. "I'm not short, damn it," Naruto shouted as he sat up on the medical cot with his fists still extended in the mid-punch position. Naruto's then blinked a few times before he looked around the room to see if he could spot anything he recognized. Normally when he passed out he ended up in the hospital from overdoing his training, so not seeing white walls was strange for him. "Where am I?" Naruto asked, and a small old man with huge eyebrow that connected to his beard came forward. "You are at the Mage Guild Cait shelter, young one. Little Wendy here found you. I am Raoul, by the way." Raoul introduced as he waved an arm at the shy Wendy, but Naruto was too focused looking at the man's eyebrows. Eyebrows that far surpassed Rock Lee's and Guy's. "What is a mage?" Naruto asked when he finally registered what had been said, and those present looked at him with some surprise at the complete honesty in his tone. He really sounded like he had no idea what a mage was. Which he didn't. "The person that uses magic, you little punk." The same guy he had punched said as he came back, and he was sporting a black eye as he looked at Naruto. Naruto twitched at the insult before he stood up and hopped of the bed and glared right back at the man. "Do you want a piece of Naruto Uzumaki?" Skinny Naruto asked in a threatening voice, and the man glared down at Naruto in a comical way. He bent down so that he and Naruto were forehead to forehead glaring at each other, and lightning was shooting through their eyes. "I, the great Jason Frost, will take you on any day, fish cake," Jason said, and they started to growl at each other before Couch interrupted them. Naruto calmed down when he saw Raoul looking at him in amusement while Wendy giggled lightly at the energetic display. Naruto quickly sucker punched Jason in the gut without, and the older male was launched off his feet again. He landed on the floor while Naruto looked at his fist in surprise. He hadn't meant to punch the guy that hard and he had been holding back. Since when has he been this powerful with his punches? "As amusing as this is, can you tell us where you come from, kid?" Raoul asked, and Naruto blinked before he finally remembered something he had forgotten. "Yeah, do any of you know how I can get to the land of fire?" Naruto asked energetically, and for a brief moment Wendy pictured a place that was constantly on fire. Then she pictured Naruto running around beating up people made of fire. Her cheeks bulged lightly as she kept her inner laughter to herself. "Never heard of it before, kid," Raoul said, and Naruto's eyes widened and he heard the clanking of chains as he moved his arms. He hadn't noticed earlier, but it looked down at his wrists where he felt something, and he saw that he had iron shackles on his hands. The chains was broken in the middle though, with each iron shackle having thick chain links to them. But the chains on each shackles weren't very long. Maybe only 4 links on each shackle. "Why are there cuffs on my wrists?" Naruto asked with a deadpan look to his face, because waking up with shackles on wasn't something a person normally had to deal with. Raoul hummed to himself before he tapped each one, and they opened before falling off of him. "I was afraid you would be destructive when you woke up, but you broke the chain in your sleep. You have an impressive amount of strength, child," Raoul pointed out, and those around nodded in agreement. Naruto himself looked around to see many older men and women wearing more tribal clothing. The girl that named Wendy was the only one even close to his age, and she wore a green dress that was stylized with a diamond pattern. She had no sleeves, and on her left arm she had a gold armband. She had on open-toed shoes with some kind of brown crisscross ankle protector. "You're Wendy, the girl I saw when I landed, right?" Naruto asked with a confused tilt of his head, and she nodded and took a step forward. "I'm Wendy Marvell, and I hope we can be friends," Wendy said with a polite if eager bow. Naruto looked confused for a moment before it turned into a grin. When she stood up straight again she saw Naruto giving her a thumbs up. "Sure, from now on you're my friend Wendy," Naruto said with a laugh before he was sucker punched across the cheek by a laughing Jason. Naruto's head hit the wall, but he stood right after and glared at the man. Naruto jumped over the bed and kicked the man in the gut just hard enough to knock him off his feet. Jason was sent into a fat man named Narada, and both of them were knocked to the ground. "You punk. Get off me. Serves you right, haha." Naruto laughed as he pointed at Jason and the random guy before he was punched in face by both Narada and Jason while he had been laughing. Naruto was sent tumbling across 3 ground and Wendy had to hop over him as he rolled under her and hit the wall. When she landed though she took a step towards Naruto before she tripped over a loose floorboard and hit her face against the wall. Spinning on her feet to correct herself she bumped into Naruto as he was standing up and pushed him against the wall by accident. "Hahaha. You loser." Jason barked out in laughter before Naruto jumped at him with a grin and punched him in the chest before being punched by Narada. Naruto stood his ground and punched Narada before being punched by Jason. Naruto punched both Jason and Narada with a grin before he was tripped off his feet by Jason. He righted himself in midair before elbowing Jason and knocking him down. "Who's the loser now?" Naruto taunted before felt Raoul's hand on his shoulder. He looked at the old man and saw the man was holding a strange stamp with the image of a cat with a freaky tail. He was giving Naruto a kind look and Wendy seemed hopeful for some reason. This may seem sudden, but Wendy here asked me if I would consider letting you join Cait's shelter. She would do good to have a friend around her age. So would you like to join Cait's shelter? Raoul asked and Naruto sent Wendy a sorry look. He would have liked to join them, but he wasn't really a mage they had said earlier. He didn't use magic even if he couldn't feel his chakra and he had a weird new energy in his body. I would like to, but I'm not a mage. Naruto said and Wendy walked towards him. Yes, you are try picturing yourself flying. Wendy hinted in the way Carla had told her she used her magic. Naruto humored her and pictured himself flying through the air and he felt two things come out of his back before he started to float in the air. He looked at the ground in surprise before he saw two white feathered wings come out of his back. He flew up higher before he hit his head on the ceiling. I can fly. Naruto shouted in surprise. He can fly. Jason and Narada shouted before they were both smacked upside the head by an elderly woman that had most of her body covered in a cloak with only her black hair and tanned face visible. Yes, he can fly, now let's give these three some privacy. She said as she pinched both men's ears and started to drag them out of the room. Naruto landed on the ground and the wings vanished. Raoul noticed that the boy's almost unnatural reserves of magic had barely even got smaller from his first use of magic. That and the magic Naruto had used wasn't very cost-effective, even if normal people couldn't really learn how to do it. Please join Cait's shelter. Wendy requested with a formal bow and Naruto's eyes widened at that before he grinned. Sign me up then, old man. Naruto told Raoul and the old man nodded and stepped forward with the stamp. Where would you like your guild mark and in what color? Raoul asked while Wendy looked at Naruto with a happy expression on her face. Naruto saw a guild mark on Wendy's right arm before he thought about it. Putting it on the chest or stomach would be pretty stupid unless he wasn't going to wear a shirt. He was thankful that somebody had been nice enough to put pants on his, even if they were some kind of strange loose white pants. He looked down at himself when he realized he was fully clothed. He was wearing an open white sleeveless vest that showed his chest and stomach. He also saw that the pants stopped about halfway between his knees and ankles. Around his waist was a long white cloth that wrapped around his waist a few times. It was tied up at the back to keep it from falling off. Right here, and can I get orange with a red outline? Naruto asked as he pointed at his right arm where Wendy had hers. He didn't really care where it was really, so why try hard and think of a unique place to put it. Raoul placed the stamp against his arm and a weird tingling was all Naruto felt before. When Raoul finished, Naruto had his guild stamp on his arm. Welcome to Cait's shelter, Naruto. Wendy said happily and Naruto nodded with a smile before he looked at the shackles on the floor. He didn't know why, but he thought that broken chain shackles seemed like both a good weapon and would look cool with his new strength. So picking them up off the floor, Naruto placed them around his wrists and locked them in place. Thanks, Wendy, old man. Naruto said with a grin before he saw that Raoul was giving him a questioning look about the shackles. He shrugged and held his wrists up. What? They are pretty cool and could come in handy. They don't really get in the way. Naruto said as he waved his arms around a little to show that they weren't very heavy for him. Anyway, we aren't a really popular guild, so missions aren't very frequent for us. The only ones we ever get are the ones that are sent to every guild, but I suggest the two of you form a team before going on any missions. Raoul said knowingly. He didn't have to worry about mission difficulty because since being formed Cait's shelter has never had a mission above C rank. The missions themselves being easy enough to say D rank, but they were in different towns, so the mission ranking was increased because of distance. I would have joined right away if you said we got missions. Naruto said with a grin as he pumped his fist in the air. He hoped that he could get some pretty cool missions with Wendy, like rescuing a princess or taking out a camp of bandits. Wendy just looked happy to be finally allowed to go on missions, since before now Raoul had told her she wasn't ready for them. No missions above C rank though, not that we get them anyway. Raoul said as he started to walk out of the room and both kids followed him as they went to the other room. Naruto was dragged by Wendy to a small board with 4 missions on it total, and Naruto learned something he couldn't read what any of them said. Wendy hummed as she looked them over before looking at Naruto. We can wait to take a mission if you want. Wendy said when she realized that she had gotten too excited to do a mission. Naruto smiled and randomly picked one of the mission from the board and handed it to her. She took it and looked at it with a smile. I am always up for a good mission. Naruto stated with a grin and Wendy looked at what the mission was. Mission rank C. Mission location Harjan Town, proper grocer. Client Frank Saucer. Mission goal help needed to attract customers to store. Reward 20,000 jewels plus colors magic item. Master Raoul, can we take this mission? Wendy asked as she took the mission to the oldest male in the room. Raoul looked at it for half a second before he took out a small book from under the counter and wrote down the information for the mission in a blank space. Then he signed his name at the bottom before writing Wendy and Naruto's names in another space. Be careful. Raoul warned as he gave them the mission paper back before he cited it to chug a bottle of whiskey again. Naruto's sweat dropped and he wondered if it was him or did all old people either become drunks or perverts. Then again, most people in his home didn't live to get old, so maybe that was just how old people were. Wendy grabbed Naruto by arm and started pulling him out of the guild, and Naruto stopped them before they could enter the forest. How are we supposed to get to the mission place? Naruto asked in confusion after a moment, and Wendy felt like palming her face. She thought that it would be obvious that Naruto was going to fly them there. Carla had always flew them everywhere they needed to go when they explored parts of the forest they were allowed to go. I thought you could fly us there. I know where it is so I can give you directions. Wendy said shyly, and Naruto shrugged before the wings came out of his back without damaging his clothes somehow. He started to float in midair before he turned around for Wendy to get on his back. The wings didn't seem to actually have to move for him to fly, it would seem, so her being on his back wasn't a big deal. They were supposed to be teammates after all. Chapter end. Naruto's new style and clothes will actually serve a purpose. Being completely white, he is given a more rough look by the style of clothes. Then combine the clothes color changing item colors and Naruto will be able to sneak around easier by blending his clothes into the surroundings by changing their color. The clothes are also extremely easy to move around it. The shackles are a good defense against sharp weapons right now, but they will be replaced with something else later. I thought the mission would be more exciting than this. Naruto thought as he gave out flyers to people watching down the streets. Since he wasn't able to read here, he didn't know what the job really was until Wendy told him on the way over here. He had also learned that Wendy used magic called Sky Dragon Slayer magic, taught to her by an actual dragon that she looked up to like a mother. He gave out another few flyers to people passing by before he turned around when he felt somebody pulled on his foot. The owner of the shop that thought it would be better for business if Naruto was floating while he gave away the flyers. Looking at the person that got his attention, he saw it was a blonde-haired girl with brown eyes and fair skin, wearing a white and blue shirt with a blue shirt. He mildly noticed that she had really big breasts, but that was only a minor thing he noticed. At her hip he saw a ring with multiple keys on it, a few gold, but mostly silver. Sorry to bother you kid, but this shop. The woman said as she held up the poster he had been handing out. When she saw that he was looking at her, she continued with a smile on her face. Do you know how to get here? She asked, and Naruto grinned. Sure thing lady. My name's Naruto by the way, mage of Cait's shelter. I can take you to the shop if you want. Naruto offered as his feet landed on the ground and his wings vanished like they were never there in the first. The girl didn't seem to think much of the fact that he had been using magic and Naruto could feel that she could use magic as well. Thank you Naruto-kun, my name is Lucy. Lucy stated as she followed Naruto while he led her to the shop. Naruto had a pretty good memory when it came to directions, but he just had bad luck when it came to places he didn't know too well. So, you are pretty young for a mage Naruto-kun. I can't say I have ever heard of Cait's shelter though. Lucy said in more of a way to keep the talking going while Naruto laughed out loud a little. Neither did I until today. I just joined today, but my partner for the mission is on the other side of town handing out flyers as well. Naruto said in a conversational way as well, knowing that he will most likely forget about this encounter somewhere along down the road. He would occasionally hand out some more flyers for the shop and Lucy looked at Naruto's back. Say Naruto-kun, do you know any other types of magic besides those wings? Lucy asked with a tilted head. Naruto didn't really mind her calling him Naruto-kun since she was maybe a good 8 years older than him. Lucy did have a hint of concern in her voice and Naruto rolled his eye lightly. His body was lean, so it didn't look like he was really strong, even though he could easily break through metal with his power. Arrow magic, and I don't know any other magic besides that. I am pretty strong on my own anyway, but what kind of magic do you use? Naruto asked in genuine curiosity, since so far he only knew about 2 magics that exist. His and Wendy's were the only ones he had ever heard of before, and neither of their magics were really battle magic. Wendy's was more support and healing, with some offense mixed in. His was completely support-based for flying around. I am a celestial key user. Lucy said as she held the keys on her waist up and Naruto tilted his head at them slightly. Seeing his confusion, she went into a deeper explanation. These keys let me summon friends to help me fight. Lucy said in simple terms and Naruto crossed his arms and nodded in understanding. It sounded like a useful magic to have in a fight, but this girl's body didn't seem well trained for single combat without her friends to help her out. Here we are. Naruto said as they stopped in front of the shop and Lucy looked at Naruto with a wide toothy smile. Naruto blinked when he felt her pat him on the head a few times in thanks before going into the store, but he just shrugged before his wings came out again and he started to float in some random direction. The job wasn't done until he gave out the entire stack and between him and Wendy, they had been given 800 pieces of paper. Naruto himself had wanted to take 500 of them, but Wendy had insisted that they split it evenly between them. If they were to be partners then they would have to do an equal amount of work. A short ways away Naruto saw a man being surrounded by a group of women with hearts in their eyes. Now being the prankster he couldn't let something like that go on. Floating over to a nearby trash can he lifted it up and started to fly in the air over where the guy was. He grinned and was prepared to drop the trash on him before he saw the group of girls get closer. He sighed and knew that if he went through with this he would end up getting the girls as well, so he flew back down and placed the trash can down and started to hand out flyers again with a sigh. "Hey, you want a flyer?" Naruto offered his pink-haired guy and his blue-haired cat, but they just ran past him with grins on their faces like they didn't even hear him. Naruto's face twitched and he promised himself that he would prank the hell out of this guy the next time he saw him. Pink hair, blue cat, and a white scale muffler. He would memorize that description for future pranking reference. Floating away, he grinned when he planned his revenge. Nobody ignores him and gets away prank-free. Naruto looked at the pile of papers in his hand and sighed in relief to see that his flying had increased the speed he had been able to hand them out. He only had like 10 left to give out. "Hey Naruto." Naruto flipped in mid-air before turning around and seeing Wendy behind him with no papers in her hands. His jaw dropped at this fact before his eye twitched when he remembered that she was a young girl. More people would take flyers from her than they would from him. "I see you're done, why don't you just wait for me at the shop? I should be done in a minute or two," Naruto said before he moved his hands away as Wendy tried to help him by taking a few of his papers. She pouted at him for not letting her help him before she blushed when she realized she pouted. "I can come with you if you want," Wendy offered as she walked by him anyway while he started to give out the few remaining flyers. Time seemed to have flown from the 5 hours ago they had arrived in the town and he couldn't exactly say they were fun, still better than catching Tor though. "How did you get done so fast?" Naruto asked with a tilt of his head and Wendy touched a finger to her chin innocently. Naruto gave out 2 more flyers to a mother and son duo before an older man with traveling gear on took one from him. "Somebody took half of mine from me and said he wanted to give them out to his friends," Wendy said after a moment and Naruto's face twitched at how lucky she had gotten. Oh well, at least it meant that their job was still going to get done faster. That still counted as attracting customers in a way, so he wasn't going to be too picky about it. It just went to prove that he would have finished first if she hadn't gotten lucky. Naruto gave out his last flyer before turning his magic off and touching the ground. "Done? Okay, now let's go get paid," Naruto said with some excitement and Wendy walked next to him with a small giggle at his excited behavior. Naruto was a pretty fun person to be around and she could tell they were going to get in trouble together. You just had to look at him and you could tell he was a person that got into trouble a lot. They entered the store and saw Frank behind the counter looking at them with their money already on the counter. Next to the money were 2 pink and red book-shaped objects with decorations on the front with mirrors. "Good job kids. That is what I owe you, and next to it are colors magic items that I promised in the reward. Just think of a color and slide your finger across the mirror and your clothes will change colors," Frank said as he wiped the counter down and with smiles they each took the money and colors. Wendy put hers in her small shoulder bag while Naruto put his half of the money in his pocket before looking at the colors. Thinking of the color orange, he slid his finger across the mirror on the front and his pure white clothes turned neon orange. "This is pretty cool," Naruto said happily as he slid his finger over it again and turned his clothes to pure white. "Thank you for your business," Wendy said with a bow before the 2 Cait shelter mages turned away and walked out of the shop. As they were walking they passed by a store that sold magazines and Wendy looked at the cover of Sorcerer Monthly with stars in her eyes. Naruto rolled his eyes slightly when Wendy bought it with some of her newly earned money before he himself saw a magazine that caught his eye. He shrugged though and didn't buy it since he didn't know how to read in this language. "You seem to like that magazine," Naruto said as he grabbed her shoulder and moved her out of the way when she nearly ran into somebody while reading it. Wendy looked at him for a moment before showing him a picture of a red-haired woman wearing armor with brown eyes, one of which was covered by her hair. He couldn't read the words, but with how big the letters were he could tell this girl was pretty important. "I love this magazine. They always have really good stories about people from fairy tale inside it and sometimes even photo shoots. This is Erza Scarlet, the Titania of fairy tale," Wendy said before she started to turn to the back of the magazine and showed Naruto a picture of a white-haired girl with her bangs pulled up into a ponytail on her forehead. Her boobie was sexy and she had a white fairy tale mark on her thigh. She was wearing a bikini in this picture. "This is Marahan Strauss, an XS class mage of fairy tale. She was recently voted the most attractive girl in the magazine. She is really pretty, huh?" Wendy said with some admiration in her voice when she looked at the various pictures of fairy tale mages. "Yeah, she is really pretty," Naruto admitted and the two of them ended up sitting at a park bench while Wendy was reading. Normally a person would leave when they finished a mission, but apparently Wendy wanted to enjoy her magazine first. Naruto blew a few hairs out of his face with some irritation before standing up. "I am going to go shopping. Naruto said, and Wendy just hummed at him to show she heard him. He had to sweat drop at that, since Sakura did the same thing to him when she was fawning over Sasuke and he was talking when she wasn't punching him in the head, that is. I wonder what I should get. Naruto thought as he entered the nearest clothing store looking for anything he could use to keep his hair out of his eyes. Humming to himself, he looked at things in the headbands that looked like the cost was less than what he had. He was lucky that numbers seemed to have stayed the same because this way he could still buy stuff without trouble. He just couldn't read what he was buying unless he could see it. He looked through the colors and designs, but anything that looked really awesome seemed to be above the money he did have with him. He could buy them, but he didn't want to waste a lot of money. He didn't have much of it, but in a fight that 1 second his hair got in the way was too much. Seeing nothing, he sighed and commented to himself that he would have to see if anyone at the guild had something he could use. Time seemed to fly by for Naruto, and by the time he got out of the store, it was finally nighttime. Naruto got back to the place where Wendy was, only to find her closing the magazine as he got there before placing it on her shoulder bag. He shook his head in amusement at how much she must have been into that magazine if she hadn't moved since getting into it. "Ready to go home, Wendy?" Naruto asked with a slight grin on his face, and she looked at the sky with wide eyes for a moment when she realized that it was nighttime. It was like she hadn't noticed time pass by. He saw her blush in the moonlight before she cooled down when she saw that he wasn't annoyed with her. "I'm ready." Wendy agreed, and Naruto summoned his wings and started floating. Wendy jumped onto his back and they started to soar throughout the air while she gave him directions again. Naruto closed his eyes and enjoyed the feeling of the wind racing across his face, and he was pretty sure that he could hear Wendy gulping down the air. The wind being so much fresher as they flew higher up. He wondered what tomorrow would bring. It had been a week since Naruto had joined Cait's shelter, and now he stood in the middle of the forest before even the sun had risen into the sky for early morning training. Naruto's eyes turned sharp as he looked at the forest around him with sharp eyes, and he got into a battle-ready position. Naruto heard a small rustling noise behind him before he jumped up into the air and moved so that he was parallel with the ground. Moving under him was a green-furred creature with a purple face with purple elongated ears and a long chin. It had a purple chest and pure white eyes. Its upper body was super muscles, with long arms that touched the ground, while its legs were small in comparison. This was a forest Vulcan, and it was attacking Naruto at the moment. Naruto finished flipping before landing on his feet as he looked at the Vulcan turning around with an annoyed expression on its face. Naruto moved his hands in the bring it on motion, and the Vulcan charged Naruto and tried to punch him. Twisting his body to the left, he punched the Vulcan in the gut hard enough so that his fist was able to knock the large creature off its feet and send it into a tree hard enough to break through it. The creature coughed up blood before it collapsed forward and landed on its face. Naruto walked forward to see if it was down for the count. Haha. Naruto jumped back when the Vulcan instantly got up and tried to punch Naruto in the face. The creature clawed at him, but he twisted so that his hands were on the ground. From this position, Naruto kicked the creature in the arm, and with a sickening wet pop, he dislocated the monster's arm. "Stupid human. That hurt." The Vulcan shouted before the next thing it saw was Naruto's bare foot before Naruto kicked the monster hard enough at the face that he knocked out the entire top row of the creature's teeth and broke its nose. A foot-shaped darker purple bruise started to form instantly on the creature's face. Blood splurted out of the creature's nose and mouth, and its face sunk in a little. Naruto placed his hand on the creature's shoulder before he twisted his body again and slammed the heel of his foot down onto the creature's forehead. With a final crack, the creature's skull caved in and blood gushed out of the open wound on the now dead Vulcan's head. That was awesome. Naruto thought with a fist pump as he looked down at the creature laying down on the forest floor. He had come to the forest for some early morning training, but he hadn't expected to be able to fight some freaky creature this ugly. Naruto heard more rustling behind him and he saw a few more of the creatures glaring at him. The one he had just killed had been about 7 feet tall, these 5 were easily 10 feet tall, with the one in the middle being 12 feet tall. Naruto jumped at the nearby tree, and the second his feet touched the bark he bent his knees and jumped off the tree with enough force to shatter the tree bark and dent the tree. He sped at the closest Vulcan, and he turned his body just before he touched the creature. Naruto landed on the chest of the creature, and when his feet touched the creature he jumped again and knocked the creature into the Vulcan behind him. The 2 Vulcans crashed into the ground, and Naruto kicked another Vulcan in the face with the added force of his jumps behind him. There was a loud crack before another crack followed it when Naruto spun around and punched the creature in the side of the head. The creature was dead before it hit the ground, while Naruto did a flip behind landing on his feet. He hopped backwards just as a fist punched the ground where he was, and he hopped up onto the arm of the creature before he ran up the arm. He hopped onto the other arm when the monster tried to slap him off. Jumping off, he grabbed each side of the monster's head before he kneed the monster in the eye. With a splurt of blood, his knee caved in the monster's skull and killed it. 3 down, 3 to go. Naruto said as he looked at the leader and the two Vulcans that had just got back up. One of which had 2-foot-shaped bruises on its chest. Naruto blinked before he was sucker punched across the face by a sixth Vulcan he hadn't noticed earlier, and he grunted lightly at th force behind the punch. Holding his ground, he tensed his knees before he jumped and did a front flip hard endpit so that when his feet hit the creature's chest, there were multiple loud popping sounds as he broke the creature's ribs and collapsed its chest. The three Vulcans looked at each other before they all ran at him at the same time. Naruto grinned before his eyes became cold and he took a breath, and then he unleashed a powerful battle cry that made the Vulcans stop dead in their tracks when the sound of his voice and the force of both his killing intent and his dominant aura overpowered their will. The leaves of the trees around the Vulcans were started to fall off, and dust picked up off the ground and messed up the Vulcans' fur. The creatures looked at Naruto with wide eyes before they turned tail and ran. Fuck avenging their fallen brethren, they were in the presence of a dangerous predator. Naruto smirked as they ran away from his battle cry. When his body had rebuilt itself, his vocal cords had changed so that he would be able to unleash killer intent-filled battle cries that would frighten weak-willed opponents, stun more powerful opponents. It would also stun things with sensitive ears, and against extremely weak opponents, he could give them heart attacks. It could blow light opponents away, but it wasn't truly an attack since it caused no real damage. It was like he asserted his dominance over others with his cry. He learned late last night that if he closed his eyes, he could use a form of echolocation with his battle cry's more advanced form. That form of battle cry wasn't made for battle, since only his highly sensitive ears could pick up the noise he used for it. Naruto suddenly tensed his legs and burst into action. The ground under his feet turned into small craters as dust shot up from the ground when he ran forward, and then he punched a thick tree hard enough shatter through the bark and put a messy dent into the tree. Ow! Naruto shouted as he held his hand in pain. He may have enhanced strength, but his body hadn't gotten used to having it yet. That in the tree was thick enough so that his strength had worked against him this time. There was a 4-foot-deep crater in the tree and he still hadn't gotten halfway through it. He had easier times breaking through rock. With rock you just had to hit it in the right place and you could crack it all the way through, but the tree was different. Rock may be harder, but a tree as thick as a boulder was a lot harder to break than a boulder. Great, now he would have to explain the bruise on his face and the broken hand to Wendy as when he got back to the guild. It would seem that he didn't heal as fast as he used to, but he still healed at a good pace. He was also really durable, so he could take a hit and keep coming. Cracking his neck to get rid of the kink that the Vulcan had caused earlier, he set off towards the guild while walking instead of flying. He didn't want to become lazy after all, so walking when he could was a good thing in his book. He walked through the really tiny village with a smile on his face as he passed by the strange people of the place. He couldn't place his finger on it, but he just got this strange feeling from them all. Even Raoul gave off the feeling, so maybe it was just the people that lived here. He noticed that the only ones to use any magic were him, Wendy, and Raoul. The others seemed to focus on making clothes for a living or were living off the land so to speak. Naruto walked into the guild and his sweat dropped when he saw most of the members were all sitting around a table with their money in their hands. Raoul was heavily drinking, while the other members were all arm wrestling, something Naruto wasn't allowed to compete in after they learned that he had enhanced strength without adding magic to his muscles. He was just naturally super strong, and that was an unfair advantage in arm wrestling. Naruto chuckled awkwardly before he walked over to the bar and got a box of juice from the kid sections. Damn underage drinking laws. What happened to your face? Naruto turned his head to see Wendy rushing to him, and she sat next to him immediately as she placed two glowing green hands on his swollen cheek. He hissed in pain slightly when she touched it, but he let the soothing feeling of getting healed sink in as the swelling went down. I was training in the forest and got attacked by some monkey things. I kicked their asses, so no worries. Naruto said with a grin when the swelling completely disappeared before he twitched when she grabbed his hand and started to heal that next. Please be more careful, Naruto. I don't want you to get hurt. Wendy said before she saw him grinning at her with his goofy smile. Hey, no pain no gain. I can only train like this because I can count on you to heal me right up. Think on the bright side. The more you have to heal me, the better you get at healing. Soon you will be able to heal stuff like this so quickly it will be like I was never injured. Naruto bragged about her ability and she blushed at the compliment. She wasn't really used to such things and being the center of attention was against her shy nature. She was the kind of person that would rather fade into the background with a friend or two. You still need to take care of your body. Wendy said as she faced the other direction and sipped at her juice before Naruto shrugged and rested his forehead against the counter. It was still early in the morning, so maybe they could get a mission and spend the rest of the day doing that. Hey brat. You and me. Right here and now. Jason shouted from across the guild and Naruto hopped off of the stool he was on and grinned at Jason. This was starting to become a daily ritual between the two of them and sometimes Naruto as well. They would beat the ever-loving crap out of each other before Naruto punched his in the jaw and knocked him out cold when he was starting to get bored. It was both good exercise and a small form of endurance training from constantly getting punched and punching. I am joining in too. The fat male Naruto said as he joined on the punching fest before the two men arm wrestling grinned and stood up and ran towards the brawl going on. Raoul stood up and took Naruto's seat next to Wendy while she watched the brawl go on with a smile. Normally she would be against something like this, but everyone looked like they were grinning. Before Naruto had gotten here, the most exciting thing for her was making and trying on new clothes. She saw Naruto get thrown out of the brawl for a second before he got right back up and rushed back into it. Seconds later both Jason and Naruto went flying out of the pit while Naruto was punched by the two muscle men. He then punched them back, only to get a chair to the head thanks to Jason. Hahaha. You just got Jason started. He got hit with a chair to the face by Naruto and was sent flying into one of the two shirtless muscle men that shall be henceforth known as George and Charles. What were you saying, dog shit? Naruto asked as he put a hand to his ear mockingly before he jumped out of the way and tripped Naruto as the fat man fell to the floor on top of Jason and George. Naruto laughed it up as forearms were waving around under the large man. Hey Jason. How does it feel to get smothered by boob man boobs that is? Naruto shouted with his laughter ringing through the guild. Screw you, I just have a deep love for food. Naruto said with an annoyed tone. Naruto scoffed lightly before he looked at Naruto crushing two men under him. Deep love for food my left butt cheek. Naruto said as he kicked Naruto in the side and rolled him off of the two guys under him. They both sent him thankful looks while filling their lungs with air and he helped Jason up only to slug him in the face 2 seconds later and knock him out. But the grin Naruto walked back to Wendy with the air of victory about him and when he sat down on her other side, she started to heal the bruises he had gotten from the brawl. Do you want to go on a mission today? Wendy asked with a slight pant to her breath as she finished healing him again. Naruto tapped a finger to head before he shrugged. Sure, what do you have in mind? Naruto asked, and Wendy put a piece of paper in front of them. Naruto couldn't read it, but she didn't need to know that. So he pretended to read it before he decided he would say yes anyway. Let's do it. Naruto said with a grin, and Wendy brightened up at him and reread the mission herself. Mission rank C. Mission location Harjan Town, Dock 5. Client caption Leonardo Fernando. Mission description help with the rebuilding of Dock 5. Reward 50,000 jewels. It will be nice to go back to Harjan Town so soon. Wendy said, and Naruto's sweat dropped when he realized that they were in for another flight to that town. He shrugged before he finished his juice and stood up. Yelp, let's head out then. Naruto said while stretching his arms to get the blood flowing. Wendy stood up and got Raoul to make the mission official before she took the paper and put it back in her shoulder bag. Standing up she ran after Naruto where he was waiting for her and Raoul chuckled to himself when he saw Naruto grow wings outside of the guild doors and fly off with Wendy on his back. He could tell they were going to go far. Did the captain tell you what we have to do? Naruto asked when she came back from talking to the captain. Naruto had taken in the damage around the dock and the city at DN. He was honestly impressed by the amount of damage somebody had done. The dock was in shambles, a large boat was crashed into a building, and there was a building that had been destroyed by said boat crashing into. Wendy was giggling nervously at him for a moment and Naruto tilted his head in worry. He wants us to go in the water and bring up all the stuff at the bottom of the dock that sank. Wendy said, and Naruto's eye twitched slightly. That sounded a bit harder than a C rank to him, but then again it was more like diving more than anything. He had always been really good at holding his breath underwater for longer periods of time than the other people in his village. Naruto stood up with a sigh before he went towards the water with Wendy. Let's get started. Naruto said, but before he could jump into the water Wendy grabbed him and pulled him back with a worried expression. Naruto was surprised by that and he lost his balance so that he hit the back of his head against a large piece of metal on the dock that WS left. Holding the back of his head he stood back up and looked at Wendy in a questioning way. You are still wearing your shackles. Wendy pointed out and Naruto's eyes traveled to his wrists with a raised eyebrow. He face-palmed when he saw that he was wearing them. He chuckled slightly before he unlocked them and placed them on the dock before he noticed something that he had missed before. Wendy had, at some point, changed from her clothes into a swimsuit. The bottom was like a ruffled green skirt and the top was green with a yellow circle on the middle of her rather flat chest with white accents around it. What is up with the swimsuit? Naruto said with a raised eyebrow and Wendy took an orange scrunchie from her shoulder bag and put her long hair into a single ponytail at the back of her head. Naruto smacked his own head when he realized they were going to get wet, but he shrugged before getting ready to jump in. Aren't you going to change into a swimsuit? Wendy asked before Naruto turned his head at her with a grin spreading across his lips. This was just as good of a chance to pass up. What, so you can see me half-naked pervert? Naruto shouted jokingly before he dived into the water before she could respond. Of course his normal clothes were a bit revealing of his chest and stomach, but he just liked the chance to have a bit of fun with Wendy. He was pretty sure that she would take him too seriously before entering a mini depression as she called herself a pervert. He opened his eyes under the dock and his jaw dropped when he saw the amount of stuff that they needed help getting out of here. Going back up above the water he got out before he went to the captain to get some rope. With the rope in hand, Naruto came back to see Wendy sulking and saying pervert to herself over and over again. Naruto picked her up and lifted her over his left shoulder, which no doubt caused her to blush. Walking toddy water's edge he jumped right back in and he heard Wendy's surprised shout as the cool water touched them. Was that needed? Wendy asked when Naruto let of her and she started to swim. Absolutely. It was really funny, but seriously I am going to need some help. Naruto said as he tossed her one end of the rope before he took a deep breath and went under the water. Swimming down he quickly got to the bottom and looked for the first things that he was going to bring up. Wendy wasn't very far away and he felt a tug at the rope to see that Wendy had tied it to a stone statue. He sent her a thumbs up before he swam out of the water and Wendy breached the surface after him. You ready? Wendy asked and her response was Naruto yanking on the rope and Wendy screamed when the entire statue shot out of the water. Naruto's eyes went wide when he saw the statue head towards the town. Naruto swung the rope around and his jaw dropped when the rope snapped. The statue went flying far out into the water. At least it isn't at the dock and nobody got hurt. Naruto said with a nervous chuckle at what he might have caused. If asked he would say that the rope was horrible quality if it broke so easily. Wendy sighed lightly before going under the water. Naruto jumped in after her and both of them swam to the bottom together and looked for the next things. Naruto grabbed one end of a couch while Wendy grabbed the other. They had some trouble, but they eventually swam up with the couch in hand. They swam to the edge before Naruto placed a hand on the dock and tossed the couch onto land. One down. Wendy tried to commented helpfully and Naruto took a breath before the two of them went back to the bottom and started to pull up more items. While they were under Naruto saw the painting of a nude woman with her face gone. With a grin he swung behind the portrait and signaled to Wendy. Bubble exploded from Wendy's mouth when she saw Naruto's face on the image of a nude woman. She quickly swam up to the top to refill her lungs while Naruto grabbed a painting and followed her. You should have seen your face. Naruto teased with a smirk on his face and Wendy went back under the water with a huff. He chuckled before going back under as well after placing the painting on what was left of the dock. He and Wendy looked around and saw that there was only one item left to take care of, so with some teamwork they were able to get a dresser up from the bottom and to the top. Naruto briefly wondered what type of ship had been destroyed if it had all this stuff on it. Let's go see if we are done. Wendy said with a small huff to show that she was a little tired. Naruto smiled as he put his shackles back on as they walked before shaking his wet hair to get some of the water out. They walked towards a large burly man wearing a sailor's suit with a pipe sticking out of his mouth. Good job you mages, but you ain't done yet. He said before they could speak and he then pointed behind him towards the boat on the ground. I need you two to use your mage stuff to break that up into chunks, then pile it up. The captain said and Wendy looked at Naruto. Got it old man. Naruto said with a grin as wings appeared to each of his back and he flew up high into the air above the boat. The captain and Wendy stood next to each other awkwardly and he puffed on his pipe before commenting. Something isn't right with that child. The man said with a chuckle and Wendy's sweat dropped at how accurate that was. Her eyes widened though when Naruto changed directions in midair and sped towards the ship. Uzumaki bomber. Wendy knocked the captain to the ground just as Naruto crashed into the ship and what was left a wooden sea vessel exploded from his speed and his punch. She quickly got off of the captain and they both looked at the scattered remains of the boat. They had shocked expressions on their faces when Naruto came out of the mess with minor cuts and some small chunks of wood sticking out of his skin. That boy is insane. The captain shouted in shock when Naruto started picking wood pieces out of his flesh and tossed them to the side. Wendy rushed over to Naruto and started healing the cuts on his body. Thanks Wendy. Naruto said as he tossed the final wood fragment out of his skin and she finished up healing him. The captain came over before he pointed from the wood to the large pile of wood and metal. That was good, but now you need to move the pile onto that pile. The captain said as he pointed at another pile and both 12-year-olds looked at the two piles in shock at the size of them. Magic? Naruto asked and Wendy nodded without hesitating. There was no way they weren't going to use magic for something like this. Naruto's wings came out of his back and he picked Wendy up by her underarms before flying to the side of the pile. Wendy puffed up her cheeks before she held her hands in front of her mouth to change the shape of her attack. Sky Dragon's roar. Wendy yelled as she sent a weakened roar to blow the pile of wood and metal onto the nearby pile they were asked to. While Wendy was roaring, Naruto would fly around with her and get a roar to pick up anything they missed. For a moment they felt like yard workers or in Wendy's case a leaf blower. Wendy huffed when they finished from lack of air and Naruto flew them back down to the shocked captain. What's next old man? Naruto asked while Wendy caught her breath with a small flush on her face. The captain was knocked out of his shock by their words before he looked away from them. That was okay, but now you have to put all the fallen brick from the building into a pile. The captain said awkwardly, and Naruto looked at Wendy for a moment and exchanged a silent conversation with her. They both sighed before Naruto went over to where most of the bricks were and he took a deep breath and calmed himself. Opening his eyes again, they were sharper before and Naruto glared at the bricks. Both Wendy and the captain covered their ears when Naruto unleashed a battle cry. The force of his voice was enough to move most of the bricks in front of him into a pile. The force of his cry even dried his hair and skin from the wind force, while his clothes bellowed around his body and dried off. Even from their distance away from him, both Wendy and the captain were felt goosebumps appear on their arms and a chill go down their spines from the roaring noise. They both felt the urge to run away from this place, and the captain had to cover his eyes to keep dirt out of them that was blown up from Naruto's battle cry. The air itself seemed to vibrate in response to the sound of Naruto's voice, as if he was close to actually breaking the air with his voice. They were both thankful when Naruto was finished and started to walk towards them. Is there anything else? Wendy asked the man, and he just reached into his pocket and pulled out some money. He gave it to Wendy, while his face was pale and sweating. He was glad Naruto stopped when he did because he had felt his heart stop for a moment. The feeling of the breath leaving his lungs and the jaws of death gnawing at his soul. He had actually wanted to kill himself to escape that feeling. He had felt like he was staring into the jaws of a king of beasts when he just looked at Naruto when he was roaring. He had trouble believing that the girl next to him didn't notice it. Your jobs are done, kids, you can go now. The captain said as Naruto walked up and surprise filtered through his features. Naruto grinned at Wendy and the two of them left the captain with the end results of their second mission together finished. So what do you want to do now? Naruto asked with his hands in his pocket and Wendy looked at the sky to see what time of day it was. She pouted when she saw that it would be nighttime soon. I guess we should just head back to the guild. Harjan town is the closest city to Cait's shelter, so our next mission might be here as well. Not a lot of places know about us. Wendy said with a depressed tone and Naruto gave her a pat on the back that turned her attention to him. Just because we don't have a mission to places doesn't mean we can't go to other towns when we finish a job. I can fly us there, you know. Naruto pointed out with a small smile and Wendy smiled back at him. She really did hope though that their next mission together would be somewhere new. 2 missions to Harjan in a row were not a good sign that they would be getting variety. Wendy jumped on Naruto's back as his wings sprouted again and the two of them took off back to the guild with the knowledge of another mission completed. Chapter end. Naruto is not learning a slaying magic and he is strong enough so that even without magic he can bust through metal with ease. Something that Natsu and Erza had proven that they can't do without their magic to help them. I have something for him that is much better. Wahahaha. Uzumaki is the king. Naruto shouted with a crazed grin as he stood on top of the bodies of HS bruise-covered guild mates. He himself was covered in bruises as well and his nose was bleeding, but he grinned all the same. He had been to Cait's shelter for 2 weeks now and things had been pretty sweet. The frequent brawls in the guild with Jason and Narada and the twins occasionally were fun. Naruto jumped off the pile of people before he started walking towards where Wendy was. Nice of you to join us commoners, King Uzumaki. Wendy said with a slight joking tone to her voice and she blushed lightly when Naruto laughed at the joke. She had started to open up around Naruto some more in the time they had started to spend together and she had learned that he could take a joke pretty well. So what do we have planned today? Naruto asked with a tilt of his head when Wendy showed him a piece of paper with another mission on it. Mission rank B. Mission location Akane Resort. Client hotel manager, Haley Holberry. Description: an employee has been stealing from customers, find out who is doing it and stop them. Reward 200,000 jewels plus 1 pair of free tickets to resort good for 3 days. I have no idea what that says, but I can the number at the bottom. Naruto thought as he saw the surprisingly high reward at the bottom. His pride wouldn't let him tell Wendy that he couldn't read, but he has been trying to learn on his own with little success. You try telling somebody that you can't read because that is humiliating. He didn't want Wendy to think he was dumber than her acted half of the time. This seems like a really easy B rank mission and Master Raubal said we can take it if we want because it doesn't involve fighting. Wendy said and Naruto's eyes widened at the fact this was a B rank mission. After 2 easy C ranks a B rank was going to be much more fun or at least somewhat challenging. Then let's do it. Naruto said in excitement in hopes that this would be a fun mission and as the two of them started to walk out of the guild doors, Naruto kicked Jason in the ribs before picking up Wendy and running out of the guild. His wings popped out and they flew away just as Jason ran out of the guild after them with an angry look on his face. At the Akane Resort, this is bullshit. Naruto thought with a twitching eyebrow as he and Wendy sat in front of a woman with long ankle-length brown hair, tan skin, and brown eyes. The woman wore a dark green business suit and on her head was a green beret. Right now she was going over the rules that they would be expected to follow as they worked on the case. Naruto understood the rules like don't disturb the guests and don't break anything, but the rule that they had to solve this without violence was strange. You two mages understand. Haley said in a condescending tone of voice, as if she thought lower of them because they were either younger or mages. It could be either one, and they wouldn't be able to tell. Understood Holberry-san. Wendy said as she stood with a bow, while Naruto just stood and nodded to the arrogant manager. He couldn't really bring himself to like people with the arrogant aura around them like this woman had. Of course you couldn't like every customer, so it would expected that there were some clients that pissed you off. This woman just gave him a creepy feeling. Do you have any leads? Naruto asked, and the manager nodded and pulled out a picture that must have been taken at night. It was blurring, but you could a womanly figure sneaking into a person's room. All he could really make out was slim figure, long hair, and a bubble butt. This looks like a girl. Wendy pointed out, and Naruto nodded when an idea went into his head. A grin spread across his face, and he draped an arm over Wendy's shoulder and led her out of the room. She looked at his face, and with a sigh she asked a question that was going to give her a headache. What are you planning? Wendy asked with a deadpan look on her face, while Naruto truly had a cat that ate the canary look on his face. The whisker marks didn't hurt the image. What was the item type that has been stolen more than any other? Naruto asked with a small grin on his face as he took out the color's magic item. He slid his finger over the Muros, and his clothes and shackles turned a sparkling gold color. Wendy's face lit up when she realized where Naruto was going with this. He was going to disguise himself and use his shackles as bait to catch the perp in the crime. Why work for a victory when you can trick the perp into doing all the work for you? You're a genius. Wendy said in surprise at the truly amazing idea, and she could actually see it working. Naruto was more clever than people gave him credit for, even if most of the time he was an idiot, he truly had his moments of utter genius. Naruto bowed to her jokingly, and he quickly turned his clothes back to their normal white color, while his shackles remained golden. They would be the bait for the trap. I live to please. Naruto said with a grin, before he rubbed his hand together in anticipation for the coming trap. He loved traps, because traps could be used to confuse the hell out of people, traps like catching things, not traps like Haku. Those kinds of traps were both funny and creepy at the same time. So where is the trap going to be placed? Wendy asked, and Naruto went silent when he figured out that he didn't know where he was going to place the trap. Naruto grinned for a moment before he took his shackles off and clasped them on Wendy's wrists. She looked at him with a raised eyebrow before her arms dropped from the surprising amount of weight she hadn't been expecting. She quickly got used to it though now that she knew they were there. Go take a bath at the hot springs. Naruto said with a grin, and she gulped for a moment before she walked towards the bathhouse in the resort. It was already pretty late at night since it was a 6-hour flight here while going at a moderate speed. He was sure that nobody would be able to resist the urge to steal from somebody while they weren't paying attention to their stuff. But went down to the bottom floor before Wendy looked into the bathhouse and she saw Naruto enter the changing room with her. He winked at her for a moment before changing his clothing's colors to match the theme of the wall. He hid in the corner of the room where he was hidden behind a fake plant and he closed his eyes long enough for Wendy to get changed into a towel and go to the baths. Let us see who is dumb enough to take the bait. Naruto said with narrowed eyes, while only keeping his eyes on the bait. He made sure not to let his eyes stray for even a second, but he did blush when two older teens came in and got ready to take a bath. 20 minutes passed and nothing, 30 minutes later and still nothing. The two girls came back and got their clothes and got redressed. 30 minutes later after that, and Wendy came back with red skin from staying in the bath too long. Naruto heard the sound of footsteps, so he jumped out of his hiding place and grabbed Wendy. He jumped back, and using the color's magic, he changed the color of Wendy's towels to match the wall. She quickly covered herself up and thanked the heavens that Naruto hadn't been paying attention to her. A thief. Wendy thought in shock when she saw an employee come in with towels in her hand. Her waist was slim, butt was bubbly, and her hair was long and blonde. She looked around a few times before she started looking through the baskets for anything. Her eyes lit up for a second when she saw the gold shackle-style jewelry wristbands. Wendy was about to stop her before Naruto grabbed her wrist and stopped her with a grin and pointed at the action. Like score, this is totally my lucky day. The woman said before Wendy saw Naruto sneak out from behind the plant and get right behind the woman. Wendy saw him take a deep breath before she closed her eyes and covered her ears. She felt the air shaking around her and even with her ears covered, she could still hear the loud noise of his shouting. When it stopped she opened her eyes and saw Naruto standing next to a pale girl who was twitching on the ground in fright with his iron shackles back to their normal color on his wrists. What did you do to her? Wendy asked, even though she knew the answer. Naruto chuckled slightly and he looked down at the girl shaking like a chicken. All he had done was use a battle cry right behind her when she hadn't been expecting. He had even toned it down a lot to keep her from getting a heart attack, but the fact she peed herself was freaking hilarious. Naruto grabbed the grill by the back of her shirt and held her at arm's length. What I did doesn't matter, what does matter is that we get paid for this, which is awesome. Naruto commented as he walked out of the room so that Wendy could change back into her clothes. Naruto whistled a tune as he waited for her out of the room, and he made sure to keep the girl at arm's reach. He didn't want to smell her anymore more than any normal person would. Maybe a battle cry was going a bit too far. Nah. Seeing her jump high enough to smack her head against the ceiling was the funniest thing he had seen since coming here. Sometimes he just had to let his prankster spirit run free and tricking a thief into beating themselves up. It made victory so much sweeter. I'm ready. Wendy said as she came out of the changing room, so with a spring in his step, the two of them walked back to the office they had gotten the details in. Haley did not look happy to see them again, even more so when she actually had to pay them and give them the tickets. That made Naruto even happier to take the reward from a person that didn't think they would have succeeded. I am starting to get really annoyed with how easy these missions are. Naruto said with a frown when they walked out of the resort, and Wendy sighed in agreement. She was getting annoyed with the easy missions as well, but she knew that as a weaker guild, they wouldn't be getting any hard missions. They would only get missions that were sent to every guild automatically, and those were easy missions. We aren't a popular or a well-known guild, so not many people send us missions. The only missions we ever get are from the people that are so desperate they send missions to every guild. If we do more missions we might get more popular. Wendy told him, and he groaned at that. The fact that this might be the only B rank he was going to do in a long time was depressing. Wendy noticed his slight depression and pat his back while holding back a giggle. Doesn't mean I have to like it. Naruto said with a pout. He wanted harder missions. Oh well, mission number 3 complete. Naruto jumped through the trees laughing as he knocked a Vulcan's head off with a single kick to the neck before he gripped the dead creature's hand and swung the body and knocked a Vulcan out of the air that had jumped at him. Naruto jumped at the creature before he crouched down on his knees and exploded off the ground and jumped the dead Vulcan hard enough in the chest that its chest caved in so deeply its ribs broke and shot out of the other side of its chest and killed the Vulcan behind it. Naruto jumped straight up in the air before he put the Vulcan in a headlock. He then went ahead and broke the monster's neck and with a jerk backwards, he sent the Vulcan over to the growing pile of dead Vulcan bodies. Naruto braced himself and blocked a punch from his left side with his forearm and with a twist he got inside the Vulcan's guard. He jumped up and kicked the creature in the chest with both his feet, and the better part was that in a crack his feet went inside the Vulcan's chest. Naruto's feet were coated in blood as he kicked the monster right in the heart before he pulled one foot out and used it to rip the other one out. He flipped and landed on his feet and with a grab and throw the dead monster joined his brethren. Swinging his fist behind him, the shackles on his wrist slammed into the face of another Vulcan and caved in its head. Naruto turned around and looked at a group of between 10 and 20 Vulcans, all glaring at him with murder in their eyes. Naruto turned around fully before he held his arms out in a welcoming fashion. Who wants to challenge me next? Naruto shouted at the angry Vulcans, and when none of them moved from their spots, he grinned and lowered his body into a crouching position. Darting off he ran straight into the center of the crowd of monkey-like creatures and kicked one in its long purple chin. He was punched in return by one behind him before he turned around and kicked it in the stomach. The Vulcan spat out blood and blood gushed from its stomach wounds while also covering his foot in the red life fluid. Kill him. Naruto jumped from his spot before bouncing from tree to tree in an effort to pick up major speed. His speed wasn't enhanced near as much to the level of his attacking power, but he could use his strength to build up an impressive attacking speed. He could even use short bursts of powerful speed. Every tree he bounced from cracked and the bark shattered. The Vulcan tried to track him with their eyes, but they were too late as he became a blur among the trees. There was an explosion of dirt that rose up from the ground and rocks peppered the creatures along with blood when Naruto finally beheaded 2 of them and stopped himself by punching the ground. They all jumped him at the same time and formed a dog pile, and within that pile, they started to punch away at him before they were all launched off him when he used brute force to throw them away. Light cuts and bruises from the surprise beating adorned his body. The Vulcans looked at Naruto's grinning face, and to them it looked like his eyes were glowing a malicious white with his eyes shadowed by his hair. A few of them took a few steps back before one got brave and punched Naruto in the head. Naruto's head tilted down before he jerked it up and stared the frightened Vulcan face to face with blood going down the left side. That all you got? Naruto asked before he slugged the Vulcan in the chest and pierced it with his hand. His fist punched the creature in the heart and blood erupted from its chest and mouth. All the Vulcans started to run away, and a few moments later Naruto learned the reason why when a few oversized tigers with gray fur glared at him. Naruto grinned at the new opponents, which were easily the same size as what were in the Forest of Death back home. The 4 tigers all roared at him in unison, and Naruto's hair was blown back by the power of the roars. Naruto grinned when they stopped before he took a deep breath and let loose a roar of his own. His dominant aura easily dwarfed those of the tigers, and he saw the animals take a few steps back while they reeled in shock while they had their fur blown back. "Come on kitties, because I got all day," Naruto said with a grin when he stopped using his battle cry. Naruto was the first one to jump into the fray and he sent a devastating kick into the tiger's mouth and knocked out all its teeth before he twirled and knocked it off his feet. He felt one of them bite into his shoulder before her bent forward and kicked backwards so that he kicked the beast in the chest and made it let go of his now bleeding shoulder. He stood back up straight and punched one in the eye hard enough so that he actually went into the eye socket and punched the brain itself. He withdrew his fist before kicked the falling body away from him. He hopped away, but wasn't fast enough at that moment when one of the claws of a tiger racked against his side. He spun in midair and then used the tiger as a springboard to jump to the next tiger and knock it out with a kick to the side that knocked the monstrous creature from its paws. He kicked out at the last tiger before the creature blocked his kick with a slash of his claw. Naruto kicked again and got the same results before he started send faster and faster kicks that just kept getting blocked by what he guessed what the leader of the tigers. The tiger slashed at him, but he blocked it with a punch to the middle of the paw. Neither before had Naruto traded blows like this with a tiger, and minutes turned into hours for the two of them. The two not dead tigers woke up and seemed to watch Naruto and their leader duke it out, and the aura went from deadly like earlier to an understanding brawl. This is so much fun. Naruto though his claws lightly scratched his chest, and his fist tagged the beast in the maw. He knocked out a tooth while blood splurted from his wound. Naruto started to adapt to the tiger, and his fist started to open up as he went for claw strikes to block the claws. Both Naruto and the tiger surged forward and crashed foreheads together before hopping back and meeting hand for claw again. The two living tigers from earlier had actually laid down and watched them go at it. Then as one both fighters dropped down. The tiger was panting in a tired position as his wounds piled up with light blood loss. Naruto fell to his knees panting lightly as he felt the damage from his fights pile up and slight blood loss as well. "You're a tough bastard, you know that?" Naruto asked with a grin on his face as he looked at the tiger, and the tiger looked at him right back with a respectful gaze. The tiger growled at him in a non-threatening way and Naruto somehow understood it. It has been said that through combat understanding between great warriors can be reached. During that fight Naruto and this tiger began to understand each other and they were both impressed. The two tigers came over and helped their leader stand up before they walked away. Naruto and the tiger leader looked at each other one more time and Naruto grinned when he figured out who his new rival was. The tiger looked at the first human to ever stand up against him without the use of magic in any way. A human that fought with the power and fury of a tiger. Then as one both Naruto and the tiger roared up into the sky and made the air vibrate with their combined power, and in that moment a bond had been forged in blood between them. The long high-pitched ringing sound that followed Naruto's loud yell and the deep reverberating sound of the tiger's roar harmonized perfectly to become a song of power. "Let's have another go again sometime, Saber, and you better be stronger," Naruto said as he stood up on slightly shaking legs and the tigers stopped with their leader giving him a look. The tiger closed its eyes before it opened them and Naruto saw the acceptance in Saber's eyes. Naruto activated his wings and he started to fly towards the guild. He got there in a few minutes and his wings vanished just in time for him to walk into the guild. He quickly got the attention of everyone there and Wendy rushed to his side. "What happened to you?" Wendy shouted in worry and Naruto smirked when she started to treat the bite on his shoulder. Sure, Naruto would sometimes come back to the guild with bruises, but never this much damage before. "I was just having some fun in the forest, nothing to worry about, Wendy," Naruto said with a grin to himself and Saber took the top spot as his rival at that moment. That beast had unnatural strength like himself. The creature was powerful and had his respect for fighting him to a draw like that. "Look at you," Wendy said in worry and he chuckled lightly. "No pain, no gain. If I want to get stronger I have to expect to get hurt and I made friends with some of the wildlife in the forest," Naruto said out loud and Wendy sighed in frustration before she continued to heal his cuts until she started to run low on magic. She would have to leave the bruises on their own until she regained enough magic to heal them. "What am I going to do with you?" Wendy asked with a sigh and Naruto laughed to himself lightly. "Well, hopefully you are going to heal me," Naruto commented, much to her secret amusement. She sighed and started to eat some air while healing him and Naruto sighed in relief. Wendy smiled when the last of his bruises were finished healing and she looked over him in satisfaction to see she hadn't missed a single spot. "You are all fit again, but please don't overdo it," Wendy requested and Naruto looked at her like he had never seen her before. "Wendy, by now you should have figured out that if I am going to do something, I will most likely overdo it to the point of being overkill," Naruto said and she hung her head in depression at how he just told her he wasn't even going to try and take it easy on the training. He was Naruto Uzumaki. Training was in his nature. He wouldn't stop training until he was the best of the best. Chapter end. There is a point to the meeting between Naruto and Saber, and that point will be brought up later. Naruto might be learning Requip from Erza, but she is a primarily weapon fighter. Naruto is a primary fist fighter, so who better to learn to fight from than a huge tiger. Naruto has shown to learn by doing, so he will grow into a strong fighting style by naturally fighting Saber. Naruto's roar doesn't sound like a roar, it sounds more like a powerful yell with a high-pitched metallic ringing behind his voice. "You're so fat." Naruto commented to the giant pig with a grin, and it glared at him before whimpering when he glared back. It had tried to fight him back earlier, but the animal had quickly learned that it couldn't win against him. If it tried to run away it would get hurt, and if it tried to hurt Naruto it would get hurt. The only solution was to wait until Noro returned it and then run away again. Naruto chuckling to himself for mocking the pig before he turned his head in time for his face to smack against something hard and metal. He fell back to his butt and the pig took that as its chance to run away since Naruto had let go of the rope. "Chaksha, fuck you." Naruto watched in horror as the pig ran away with surprising speed before he hopped onto his feet and glared up at a familiar woman that he had bumped into. She was a beautiful red-haired woman wearing armor and warm cold brown eyes. She herself took a moment to look over Naruto from his scuffled dirt-covered appearance from the mission, his basic white clothes, and the broken shackles he wore on his wrists. She even saw his bandaged chest from his most recent brawl with Saber. An escaped slave. The woman, who Naruto remembered was named Erza from when he talking about her, thought to herself before she noticed Naruto glaring up at her. "Can I help you?" Erza asked bluntly, and Naruto pointed at the direction the pig came from. "Help me catch that pig you made me lose, and then we're even." Naruto said just as bluntly, and Erza looked at the pig running away past the tree line. She sweat dropped a little before looking down at Naruto. If she hadn't sensed the massive amount of magic dwelling within this boy, she would have thought that he was a civilian boy. He must be a mage from an unpopular guild if he had this much magic, and she still hadn't heard of him. "I can spare some time to help you find that Hadras. I am Erza, Scarlet Mage of Fairy Tail." Erza introduced, and Naruto blinked a few times at the blunt way she talked. It was like she didn't even bother hiding what she was thinking. "Naruto Uzumaki, and I'm a mage of Cait's shelter," Naruto said, and when he heard his own voice he blinked and realized that they were both blunt people. Erza nodded and she started to jog in the direction of the Hadras, with Naruto staying a step ahead of her with a smirk on his face. He may be short, but his muscle power allowed his to outrun people with longer legs, without him having to use magic. Erza looked at him running ahead of her, before she picked her speed up and got a few steps in front of him. Naruto's eyes narrowed and he started to go faster. "I see you like competition, a very good trait for somebody so young," Erza said as she ran faster and got in front of him, only for him to take the lead again and looked at her from the corner of his eye. He saw her eye twitch at him before his eye twitched when she increased her speed and ran in front of him. He started to push himself further and he passed her by and Erza pushed magic into her legs to increase her speed so that she was perfectly even with him. At this point they had forgotten all about the pig and just being faster than the one next to them. They were running arm to arm and they were looking at each other in the eyes with determined expression. The 12-year-old boy and the 20-year-old woman sped past everything that saw them. The clanking of her armor and the chacking of his shackles chains being the only thing animals heard before they ran by. Naruto saw her clothes glow golden for a moment before her outfit was replaced by red pants with yellow flames at the bottom with a black outline. She wore no top and the only thing keeping her modesty hidden were bandages wrapped around her breasts. Her long red hair was also now put up in a tail at the back of her head. "To make me have to use a lighter armor, this kid is fast," Erza thought as she took the lead again, and Naruto had to push himself to the limit of his running speed to catch up with her again. The red-haired woman smiled lightly as they pressed against each other again, but Naruto blushed lightly from either the effort to keep up with her or the fact she was half naked and his face was nearly pressed against her breast. "You're pretty fast," Naruto admitted with a light pant in his voice from going at his full speed. Naruto had tried experimenting when it came to channeling magic through his body, and it would appear his control wasn't to that level yet. When he tried he always used too much and tore his own muscles to shreds. Until he had a true magic teacher to show him how to do it, he was stuck with only what his body could naturally give. Which was still a lot. "You're quite fast as well to keep up with me like this," Erza pointed out with a graceful smile before she started to gain the lead again. She was wearing some pretty light clothes and combine that with the fact she was channeling magic through her longer legs and she had a pretty good advantage against him. Naruto saw her taking the lead and his competitive side started to completely take over and adrenaline rushed through his veins and he caught up to her again. Fire burned through his blood and his face was red from the pure effort it was taking not to lose against her. "I am not going to lose," Naruto yelled and the ground cracked with every step he took and Erza smiled gently at him. They were both oblivious to their surroundings until they ran over the edge of a cliff. The competition stopped at that moment when they saw how high up they were before they started to fall. Naruto saw Erza falling quicker than he was, but before she could change into something else, the scarlet-haired woman felt Naruto's arms wrap around her stomach. She felt a jerk and looked shocked to see that they had stopped falling. "He can fly?" Erza thought as she turned her head to see Naruto flying them back up to the top of the cliff while carrying her with some effort. He had never had to fly with a full-grown person before, so he wasn't used to the weight. The strength of his flight ability wasn't nearly as high, and with physical strength. "That was a pretty cool thing you did with your clothes earlier," Naruto said conversationally, and Erza raised an eyebrow at how he seemed perfectly normal again. "I use X-Quip magic to change my armor and weapons," Erza told him, and he hummed to himself. That actually sounded pretty cool, and with it he could get his own weapons or armor. He could even get explosives for later use and store them later. "So what brings you here?" Naruto asked, and Erza blinked a few times before palming her face and looking at the ground below them. She had come here originally to find a monster that had been terrorizing the village lately, but she had gotten sidetracked. "Have you seen a monster around these parts?" Erza asked, and Naruto shook his head. That was before the two of them twitched when they heard the sound of people screaming. Naruto flew towards the sound of the screaming, and the two of them looked to see a dinosaur-type monster with a large horn running through the village. Finally. Excitement. Naruto shouted as he flew straight at the creature with a grin on his face. This was what he had been hoping for. The chance to fight an actual monster and not giant tigers or Vulcans. Something besides Saber that could provide him with an actual challenge. "I take it you have a plan to take care of that creature?" Erza asked, and Naruto stayed silent before Erza summoned one of her swords when she figured out that he had no plan. She figured he wasn't the kind of person to plan things out beforehand. Much more of the on-the-fly fighter. "Kill it?" Naruto said unsurely, and Erza hummed in agreement. That seemed like a great plan to her, and it was easy to remember so she wouldn't forget it. They got closer to the creature before it suddenly turned around with its mouth open, and due to their momentum, Naruto was able to stop them in time before the monster swallowed them both whole. Erza and Naruto were pressed together closely as they slid down the throat, and Naruto's eye twitched when he remembered the time he had been eaten by the snake. "This is unpleasant," Erza stated as they dropped into the stomach, and in the golden light, Erza was holding a crystal that was glowing with a blue light. Now that they could see, Naruto grimaced when he saw the bones of many different animals in the creature. The smell wasn't so great either, so he had to breathe through his mouth. "I hate being eaten," Naruto said with a twitching eyebrow, and Erza looked at him in surprise. "This has happened to you before?" she asked after regaining her composure. Escaping out of here was going to be pretty easy, so with a stab she tried to cut the creature's gut open from the inside out to no avail, she discovered with a frown. "Yeah, big-ass garden snake swallowed me whole a few months back," Naruto said in annoyance before he blinked when a wicked idea formed in his head. Erza raised an eyebrow at his behavior before he got closer to her. "Want to get out of here?" Naruto asked with a grin, and she nodded neutrally. "What do you have in mind?" Erza asked with curious look. Naruto stood up before he walked to the edge of the stomach and put his ear to it. Shaking his head, he went to another part and did the same thing before grinning wildly. Extending his arm out to her, he jiggled his chain around. "Grab onto this and prepare to swing your sword at this part of the stomach," Naruto said with a grin that was returned by Erza when her highly trained mind picked up on what he was doing. Her strength alone wouldn't cut through the stomach lining, but with he swung her and she swung her sword, she could combine their strength and increase her chance of cutting through the stomach. In a glow, she summoned a red sword that was on fire before she grabbed Naruto's chain in her other hand. "Ready?" Erza told him simply, so with a grunt Naruto twisted his body around and swung Erza, and as fast as he could. She swung her sword the second she got close to the wall, and her flaming sword tore through the stomach as blood rushed into the gut. Stomach acid left, and Naruto saw that they were going to drown in blood. Erza heard the creature cry out as its inside shook, and she grabbed onto Naruto. Both of them held their breath as blood completely filled the stomach up before they were picked up and shot up the throat. "I was eaten, and now it is throwing me up. A new experience every day," Erza thought as she gushed out of its mouth and onto the ground. She wiped blood from her eyes before taking a breath and seeing that both she and Naruto were completely covered in the red life fluid of the now dead creature laying on the ground. "This is gross but pretty cool," Naruto said when he looked at the dead creature, and he mildly wondered where Wendy was when all this was happening. Knowing her, she got lost in the forest or was looking for him. Naruto blinked though when Erza grabbed him by the back of his shirt and started to drag him along the way. "Let's get this blood off of us," Erza said, and Naruto's eyes widened when he figured out what was going to happen. He was torn between going with her or running away and not showering. His decision was decided for him apparently because the second he tried to run, she placed him over her shoulder. If you read Fairy Tail, then you know she would do this. This woman either has little shame, or she isn't worried about a 12-year-old seeing her nude, or she is just weird like this. Naruto thought with a deadpan expression when he saw Wenyi run by with the Hadras chasing her comically. He blinked and saw her holding a stick with a piece of bacon at the end. Okay, so she had the job handled pretty well. So do you bath with every guy you meet, or am I special? Naruto teased from her shoulder, and Erza chuckled lightly at his comment. Sure, it could be taken as an insult, but she wasn't going to take offense to it. He didn't sound like he meant it in a hurtful or spiteful way. You might be a strong kid, but you are still a kid. That and after entering battle together we are comrades, and what is a little skin between friends, you also remind me of a friend of mine, and we had showered together when we were kids. Erza explained, and Naruto figured that she had a combination of little modesty and was weird. He blinked and let himself relax on her shoulder, because to be frank, it felt good to be the one get carried for once. Usually he had to carry other people around, so not having to walk or float was fun. So you were fine with being naked in front of a 12-year-old? Naruto asked sarcastically, and Erza didn't hesitate to respond. Completely fine with it. Erza said simply, showing a side of her that she was pretty sure would cause her guildmates back home to look at her strangely. Then again, there was just something about this kid that made you want to get close to him. The fact that they were both completely soaked in blood was part of the real reason she was fine with bathing with him. She didn't want to stay like this any longer, and she was pretty sure that he didn't like being covered in blood either. 20 minutes later. Ah. This feels nice. Naruto said as he sunk into the water of the surprising deep bath, while Erza sat at the shower with a towel draped over her waist. She was used to earring skimpy outfits, but he was surprised that Naruto seemed more interested in the hot water of the bath than her body. He submerged most of his body, leaving only the top half of his face above the water so that he could breathe through his nose. So do you know any other magic besides arrow magic, Uzumaki-kun? Erza asked as she rubbed the soap over her arms, and Naruto brought his mouth out of the water to answer. Not really. I am a fist fighter with powerful muscles even if they are lean looking. I just don't see any magic working for me. I do want to learn some close-range combat magic, but I don't know anyone that can teach me. Naruto said without really any bad emotion behind it. He was still going to get stronger, even without more magic types. Have you looked up any types of magic you would be interested in learning? Erza said, and Naruto flushed slightly. That would mean that he would have to read books to learn about more types of magic, and frankly he neither could nor would want to. He didn't like reading very much. Not really, so what is fairy tale like? Naruto said, and Erza balled her fist, and her eyebrow started to twitch. They are a bunch of rowdy idiots. Erza said, before she smiled and rinsed her body off. Even so, they are like a family. They may be a bit destructive, but they are good people. How do you like Cait's shelter? I can't say I have ever been to that guild before. Erza asked, and Naruto smiled at her description of fairy tale. If he joined Cait's shelter, he would have liked to be in fairy tale if that was how they were. It is a quiet guild most of the time, and we don't have many members. We don't even really get that many missions. Most of them can be taken care of by one person. I really want to go on harder missions, but my partner isn't really interested in them. That and the highest mission we have even gotten at the guild was rank B. Naruto complained with an annoyed sigh. He liked to be challenged, and the only thing that Cait's shelter that was a challenge was defeating Saber in their daily fights. For an animal, that tiger could take a punch and then keep coming back for more. It was more surprising since he could take one of Naruto's punches. Something that could bust through skulls and stone easily and dent metal if he wanted to. Saber was a tough bastard. I feel like I am forgetting something. Naruto thought to himself before he shrugged. It would come to him later. What if Naruto becomes strongest mage of fairy tale? And thanks for watching my video till the end. If you enjoy this content, then do consider subscribing to my channel and leave a like if you guys need the next part. Comment down, and thanks for watching the video and see you guys next video.